go.
Give us a countdown.
All right, we are live. And what's up, aviators? Welcome to session 4 of Project AVIATE's Up and Away streams. Today we'll be discussing about procedures for our takeoff, cruise flight, and the most important part of a flight, the landing, which we all want to see you butter today on your X-Plane Mobile. As always, my name is Stephen Hahn, the Secretary of Project AVIATE, and I hope to see that you are all staying safe and not evacuated due to the fires if you live in California right now. Also, I would like to introduce our other Project AVIATE officers with us today on this beautiful but smoky and hazy Saturday morning. Yuvraj, take it away.
Hey, everybody. My name is Yuvraj. I'm the Vice President. Today, Steven's going to be our pilot. I'm going to be explaining a lot of the things along with Henry and Calvin. And Steven's going to demonstrate on his flight simulator, and we hope you can follow along at home on X-Plane Mobile. Off to you, Calvin.
Hello, everybody. I'm Calvin Lin. I'm the treasurer at Project AVIATE, and I hope you enjoy today's stream.
And Henry, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. Henry here from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. I'm here today just kind of give some advice to Stephen and Niraj, and just to kind of fill in anything they might want to further explain. And yeah, without further ado, looks like we can go and start flying.
Great to hear from you. All right, so to begin with, Calvin's going to start us off with the before takeoff procedures. Calvin, take it away. And Stephen, it'd be nice if we could have the slide going here.
It is on now.
Okay, thank you.
So before takeoff, when you're holding short of the runway, make sure to turn on the brakes make sure to turn on the brakes and then turn on the lights. And then set your trims to 0. So on the Cessna, you only have one trim, which is the elevator trim. It should be that wheel. There's like a wheel on the right side next to the yoke. And then you have to check your controls. So what you do is you hit the yoke and you put it full right. And then make sure that the aileron.
Yep, that's correct.
So make sure that the ailerons are moving in the right way. So I think when you move it full left, you should see it. You should see the left one move down and the right one move up. And then when you move it full right, you should see the left aileron move up and then the right aileron move down. And then you also need to check the elevator movement.
Yep, the elevator.
So you push it all the way down, all the way in, and you should see the elevators go fully up. I think the ailerons go fully up, or the elevators go fully up. And then when you pull it all the way back, you should see the elevators go fully down. Fully down. And then this other way around.
And then the rudder as well.
And then the rudders, check the rudders, make it full left, and you see the rudder on the back. It should turn left. And then when you push it all the way right, you should see it turn all the way right.
That's right. Okay, so after that come the final checks. So you want to make sure that your transponder is working, your flaps are set. Your transponder, you want to verify the code, the one that ATC give you, and your modes and stuff, and want to make sure that's good. And then you want to make sure that your flaps are set where they're supposed to be. So generally on a Cessna, you can definitely take off with flaps at about 10 degrees, but you don't really need to do that in general aviation planes. And oftentimes, you don't even need flaps for takeoff in Cessnas. However, you will notice if you ever fly in a big airliner that all of those larger planes take off with their flaps down. Not all the way, just a little bit, about 5-10 degrees, sometimes 15. But yeah, so then after that, you make sure your flight plan is all good to go. Turn on your taxi light. Set the parking brake off, and then turn on your landing lights, and then you go on to takeoff. So as you line up with the runway, which Steven is right now, what you do is you turn off the brakes, turn off the parking brake, slowly push in the throttles. So there's a little bit of a lag here, so I'm not going to be able to notice this perfectly, but I'm assuming Stephen is demonstrating this as I talk
Yep.
about it.
Throttle is in.
Yeah, perfect. And then as you push the throttle in, you should notice your RPM gauge climb, and a few seconds later, you should notice your airspeed going up as well. So as that happens, you wanna really take note of the airspeed and um, the rotate speed, which is the speed at which you pull the yoke up and start climbing. The rotate speed in a Cessna is 55 knots. So as you notice the speed reach 55 knots, you can gently pull up on the yoke, and Steven's up, climbing away. And then as they climb, what they want to do for climb is hold a speed of somewhere between 65 and 75 knots. And correct me if I'm wrong, but a pitch angle of about 5 degrees, I think. And that's the optimal climb rate for a Cessna climbing up. And then as you start getting faster, you slowly take up your flaps because you don't need them anymore. So that's pretty much it. That's the basic takeoff procedure. It's not that difficult. Uh, I na- I'm going to now hand it off to Stephen to discuss cruise.
All right. Hold on there. I am stalling the plane. Not good.
Yeah, I don't
Cruise
want to pitch up
flight.
too much.
All right. So let me just turn on the down one real quick so we can cruise away from the airport. All right. So once you've taken off from the airport and you know where your destination is, if you don't, there are ways to program in the GPS. There's also ways to navigate there. In our previous lesson, Henry talked about navigation tools. So after you're able to set up your airplane to point the aircraft towards the direction that your destination is, you will then start your climb and cruise checklist. Although we were just going to simplify them today. You can see on the screen, we will set our power. If you're climbing, we normally set it to 100% power, which is the throttle will be fully in and the mixture will be fully in. But once you get to a certain altitude where you want to cruise at, let's say you want to cruise at 1500 feet, which I am at right now, you'll start to reduce your power to approximately uh, 2000 RPM. It's going to say 20 on the RPM gauge, which my um, yoke is covering, but the needle should be at 20. I'm going to turn real quick. There you go. It is at 20. That is our cruise RPM normally. Normally we do cruise a little more than 2000 RPM, maybe 23, 24. 25 and 26 are basically 100% power. So we want to cruise around 75% power, approximately 2000 RPM. And we will adjust our trim. Yes, we will adjust our trim. So basically, a little recap of the trim is trim basically flies the plane for us. It's not an autopilot, but instead of fighting the yoke up and down, which basically aerodynamics force us to, the trim will basically do that for us. So on the bottom left corner, you can notice that my trim is set to positive 44%. Notice that if I put it to 0%, notice what my plane starts to do. My plane starts to pitch down, which basically means that I am constantly pulling back up with 0% trim. So when I set it to 50% trim or whatever I had it at, 45 I think, 45% trim, then I don't have to constantly pull back on the yoke and the aircraft will be flying in a level state. The trim is a little hard to get used to. What you have to do is basically, if you're flying on a simulator, you would just mess around with the trim and you will then see what it's going to do. Positive or negative trim, you're going to see how it feels like. Just on a flight simulator, just put whatever makes you
So
feel comfortable.
I apologize for interrupting, but I think we can talk about the vertical speed indicator here while setting trim.
Hmm
How you can maintain level flight with the zero. Do you want to talk about that real quick, Stephen?
Um, So in real life, when you fly, you're basically
Hmm.
just using the feeling of the yoke to adjust the trim. But
Right.
in the flight simulator, you can see that I am going up and I'm approximately like climbing at 500 feet per minute. So that's going to tell us that we should level off, and our attitude indicator is telling us that we are slightly climbing there. But you just use your trim to make sure that that needle vertical speed is centered at 0 feet per minute. So that's basically saying we're not climbing and we're not descending.
Right. So the trim, what it does is instead of you having to hold the yoke back and keep constant pressure on the yoke with your hand as you climb, the trim kind of has a preset level where it can set the elevator for you, so you don't have to constantly hold it back. So bigger planes can often have even adjustable aileron and rudder trim, so they can actually hold bank levels or airliners need rudder trim in case of engine failure. But yeah, we'll discuss that later. But yeah, for now, it kind of holds the yoke for you. That's the main job of the trim.
And just a quick comment. So sometimes when you're trying to trim the airplane, it can actually help. Well, this is what kind of applies in real life airplanes, but if you want, you can also do it in Sims 2, is where you kind of hold the controls to the point where the airplane is flying straight and level, and then you trim it to the point where you no longer have to feel pressure on the yoke. So that's a big thing in general aviation airplanes, is where you kind of hold the yoke to level flight and then pull it back. And when you feel no pressure, that means the airplane is just holding the flight controls in that general position.
Right. Again, so all of this it would help you understand this if you actually followed along at home on a flight simulator. It would make more sense as well.
Yep.
So
Heading
is that
indicator. Oh, sorry.
yeah? No, go ahead.
So
I'm
our
sorry.
next one is heading indicator. This is mainly if you're flying in real life. I do not know if simulators will actually simulate this, but your heading indicator right in the middle of the six pack is a gyroscopic instrument. So that basically means that every 15 to 30 minutes, it's not going to read the correct information. So what we're going to do is right now the heading indicator is showing about a 1, 2, 13, 135 heading. Shows us a 135. Yep. And then we go up to the magnetic compass. Now, in a simulator, it's hard to tell where it is because it's in the middle, and it also changes from your perspective. So if you're on sitting on the co-pilot side on the right side seat, that's gonna show that you're heading off a 150. But if you're sitting in this seat, it kind of shows you heading off a 120. So the magnetic compass is kind of weird. You're gonna have to like put your face, if you're flying a real plane, you're gonna have to put your face like in the middle of the two seats and look at the magnetic compass directly head on. Then you'll know um, your actual heading. And for some reason, in this case, there's no tick mark that's supposed to show you where you're heading. I'm just gonna estimate that's in the middle of the 15 and 12. So basically, it is showing our correct heading. But in real life, there's gonna be a little line in the middle that shows you where exactly you are heading on the magnetic compass. And so basically, every 15 to 30 minutes, your heading indicator is not going to show the correct thing. You would use this orange button right here, correction, the white button, the white knob, you would turn that and that would turn the entire compass card. Then you would match the compass card to the magnetic compass that is on the top of the aircraft. That is basically how you realign, and you have to realign it every 15 to 30 minutes. And just another recap, this yellow heading bug, it's called a heading bug. That is basically what you see in the middle here. That is basically what you see, the little bug right there. Notice if I change the heading, that thing's gonna move, and that's where my airplane's gonna fly. I'm currently using autopilot, but I'm gonna set it to a heading of 130. The heading bug goes to 130 on the compass card on the heading indicator, then the plane will fly there. And last one on the bullet point is the VHF Guard. And VHF Guard is basically 121.5. We normally don't say VHF guard, we just say guard or emergency frequency because 121.5 is the emergency frequency in the United States. I do not know if that is the emergency frequency for other countries, but um, in the United States, if you need help, you tune in to 121.5. I'm already tuned into that on Infinite Flight. What you do on it 121.5 is if you have an emergency, just announce your emergency and announce your location. Now you might ask, who's gonna hear you announce on 121.5 if it's an emergency frequency? Well, air traffic controllers who listen to towers, who are operating in towers, at least one of them are going to be listening to 121.5. And if you're on 121.5, or if the checklist says to monitor 121.5, that means that other aircraft flying in the general area will also be monitoring 121.5. Now, it is not a regulation that you have to be monitoring it, but a lot of airliners do monitor it on their second radio when they're not talking to anybody. So this is important because if you have an emergency and you're not able to contact air traffic control, then you can announce your emergency on 121.5 and someone will hear you and someone will try to relay information to their air traffic control to get you help. That is basically the function of 121.5. It is an emergency frequency. Do you guys have anything to add?
Did you mention the mixture?
Oh, mixture. Okay.
Yeah.
Mixture is the red knob you see on the bottom. Of course, in aviation, you're not supposed to touch anything that's red, but the mixture is one thing that you can touch, but you have to be super cautious because in our last stream, Nikhil has shown that if you pull out the mixture, mixture is basically fuel. If you pull out the fuel and you don't put fuel in the engine will shut off. Now your plane won't fall to the ground, but it will start gliding and you will lose power and you will lose altitude and you have to find a place to land ASAP. But here today, the mixture is, I don't believe I can. One moment.
Oh,
I'm gonna
so
see if I
it's
can.
not adjustable here in Infinite Flight.
No, I could. It is. There's a thing here.
Okay.
They added it. So, mixture
Nice.
is the fuel that goes into the cylinders. When
So
you're
it's well,
using,
it's not. It's. I'm sorry to
Mhm.
interrupt again. It's
Go ahead.
pretty much the amount of fuel, how much fuel you're dumping in.
Yep.
It's not. There's not different types of fuel or anything like that.
Yeah. So throttle controls the air going to cylinders. Mixture controls the fuel going to cylinders. Now you might ask why we need less fuel when we're flying. Well, you only need max fuel, basically full mixture, when you are in full power and you're on the ground. But the higher you go and the less power you use, then there's less air going into the cylinders because air is less dense the higher you go. So less air will be going into your cylinders and into the engines the higher you go. So that means that you'll need less fuel because if you have less air going to the engines and you have lots of fuel, that is an uneven amount and that might cause worse performance than you might want. So what you would do is you would actually pull the mixture knob out. In infinite flight, you can't really see. I'm going to take away these slides real quick so you can see where the controls are. You can see that on the bottom right here, there's a little mixture icon for infinite flight. But for X-plane, you should be able to just pull out the red knob.
Yeah.
So
So
how to? Sorry, go ahead.
So another thing I just wanted to mention real quick with mixture was it also helps you save fuel because if the air is really thin and you're dumping in full fuel that's mostly just burning up and not being used up, it's also going to cost you because you'll have to fill up your tank again. And as a student pilot, you really don't want to be spending more money on gas than you have to. So yeah, it's pretty important to take care of your mixture.
One thing to add to that, in aviation, general aviation fuel is approximately $5.25 a gallon. And this aircraft, Cessna 172, holds 56 gallon. So just do 56 times 5.25. I can't do quick math, but that's how much it would cost to fill up the Cessna
Wait, what?
172.
I'm sorry, what did you say was the price again?
56 times $5.25, so 5.25.
So that comes out to $294.
$294 to fill up the fuel tanks from empty. So kind of pricey.
Although,
Yeah.
just to add something real fast, to give some perspective or to give some relief, sorry, most flight schools operate on what's called a wet rate. So included in the rental fees per hour, they'll usually include how much fuel the airplane will consume on average over a period of time. So, like a flight school could rent an airplane for $120 an hour, but they've already included the fuel. They've already included the price for the fuel during the flight. And usually, what you do, like you can do it at Purdue, is you keep the receipt from fueling an airplane, and then you give it back to the flight school, and they'll actually pay you back how much you paid for fuel. But of course, that's just because you've already paid for fuel in your rental fees. But yeah, it's not like you pay $120 for the airplane and then $300 for the fuel itself on your cross country.
Yep.
That was a very helpful explanation. Thank you, Henry.
So now the next part of the mixture is how to set the correct mixture. Well, if you're flying in real life or if you're flying the sim, just take out enough mixture to where. So if you're flying in real life, I would say take out the mixture where until the engine starts getting rough. What I mean by engine getting rough is when the engine slightly shakes. Yes, it does not sound like a good thing, but it's going to shake only for like a second or two. Then you would know that you're at the least amount of fuel you can give the engine, because any more you pull out, you would starve the engine and the engine would die. That's just a symptom of the engine's going to die. So if the engine starts shaking, then you would just um, push a tiny bit of mixture back in, maybe 5 to 10% of mixture back in. Now on a simulator, what you can do is you can look at your tachometer, which is your RPM. The thing I don't like about infinite flight is you can't really see your tachometer with the yoke there. But when you lean out your mixture, your RPM is going to go up. Yes, it's going to go up. It's not going to go down because you're flying at a higher air density. Your air density is... Okay, I'm not going to use air density. You're flying higher, so air is less dense. So when you lean out your mixture, you're going to be going from too much fuel to the right amount of fuel. So that is why your RPM is going to increase. But then if you keep taking the mixture out, your RPM is going to drop. So to know where you have just enough mixture, you would pull out the mixture just until you get the most RPM, so the max RPM you get before you lose RPM. It is hard to display in this one.
There's like a sweet spot in there.
Yeah.
Is pretty much what you mean.
If I start a turn... Okay, wrong way. If I start a turn, okay, well, can't really show, but I will just start leaning out the mixture. Oh, well, my engine
the
just
red
died.
knob does move.
My engine just died. No worries,
Oh,
just
no.
gonna restart the engine just like that. I hope I didn't lose altitude.
Oh,
What am I
there we
doing?
go.
Okay. Well, yeah, so you did see that the red knob does move. I was surprised that it moved, but they recently remodeled this aircraft, so it does move. Normally, it would be like approximately, say, 70% mixture, although it's hard to tell, 70%. So just find the sweet spot where the RPM um, is at its greatest, and not the max, and not just before it drops RPM, basically. That's how you set the mixture.
Yeah, and that's mixture for you. And then when you go back to land, you want to push the mixture back in because the air's getting thicker again as you descend, and you
Yeah.
want that power
One thing to
in
add
the
to that,
engine.
you would normally leave your mixture in for full power climb. You would also leave your mixture in if you're below 3,000 feet, because anything below 3,000 feet, the air is normally just still as dense as it is, although it's slowly getting less dense the higher you go. But for most flight schools and most people just normally tell you, just leave the mixture full before you are above 3,000. Same thing happens when you're coming into land. If you're descending through 3,000 feet, you would put them to full rich.
Yeah. Oh, so just to explain the terms real quick that Steven's using here. So mixture full rich or full means the knob is all the way pushed in, and there's unrestricted fuel flow to the engine, the max that it supports. And then mixture lean or pulling it back means you're pulling the mixture knob out. And what that does, it limits the amount of fuel a little bit, as Stephen explained. So that's the terminology that they use to adjust mixture. Just wanted to clear that up real quick. Anybody want to add anything else? Henry, Calvin?
Well, just something real quick. A lot of modern GA airplanes actually have introduced a fuel flow indicator. I think the Cessna has one too. But what you can do actually is you can lean it out to where another thing that you can help to lean it so that we don't have to see the engine die is you can lean it to a point where the every airplane has what's called the pilot's operating handbook, and the manufacturer basically forecasts at certain altitudes what fuel flow should be expected in under certain conditions. So that can also help you. And it is quite a difference because just to give some perspective, like the planes we fly here at Purdue, the Piper Archer, I've usually on takeoff and cruise when it's full rich, we can get about 10.5 gallons per hour to the engine. But if we lean it back, I've even seen us get down to about 8 gallons an hour. So that's 2 gallons per hour that we're not using, and that'll keep us extra safe for flying.
Yeah, because if you're flying and you come across obstacles or bad weather and you need to go around it, you'll probably need that extra fuel, and saving some fuel always helps. Always a good idea. Thank you for that, Henry. Good
So I would like
explanation.
to add one more thing. So
Yeah, of
during
course.
your
Go ahead.
climb and cruise, you should be checking your flight instruments and engine instruments. Of course, um, you would check
Oh
these
yes.
like periodically, but the most important, you just go from left to right. So I think it was last meeting where we described all the instruments. So of course, fuel flow on the left side, just make sure that they're just in positive values, nothing is showing zero. If it is showing zero and your engine is working, then that means it's a faulty indicator. So just keep on flying. You don't have to be scared if it shows zero. Normally, it won't happen in the sim, but it can happen in real life. Although it is good to take a precautionary landing at the closest airport and find out what's wrong with it. But if your engine's running, you're fine. Temperature and oil pressure, make sure that they're just in the green. If they're not in the green, in real life or in the sim, go ahead and start landing the airplane. EGT is
Cool.
exhaust gas temperature. That is something that we use to change the mixture, but today we just taught you how to change the mixture based on the RPM, which is one of the main ways you can. EGT we will focus at later on, but you don't need to worry about that. Fuel flow, make sure it's in the green. Amp, make sure that's zero because it's not discharging the battery and it's not overcharging the battery. Vacuum is in zero, is in the green. Then over to the flight instruments, just make sure that this is the six pack, of course. The three on the top, three on the bottom. It's called the six pack. You mainly look at the six pack the most. You just basically scan them all, make sure that they're all correct. You know, you're hitting on the correct heading. If you're in cruise flight, make sure that your vertical speed is agreeing with the attitude. So it's no, both of them are just neutral. Altimeter is also neutral. It's staying at a constant altitude. Airspeed's at the correct airspeed you set the power to because more power, more airspeed. Lower power, less airspeed. Turn corner just agrees that you're not turning at this time. And of course, you would be monitoring radios, talking to air traffic control in real life. You also have the VOR navigations we talk about, GPS navigations that we would navigate towards an airport with. That's basically it. You just monitor those. And yeah. One thing that we did forget for the takeoff procedures is to make sure that our fuel selector valve is on both. In a Cessna,
Oh,
we would
yes.
always want them on the both. You don't need them on the left or the right for a high wing aircraft. A high wing aircraft is when the wings are on the top of the aircrafts. Thus, it is called a high wing. There are low wing aircrafts, which I might be able to show from Infinite Flight later. Low wing aircrafts are basically the wings are below the aircraft. They're not below the aircraft. They're just attached to the bottom part of the aircrafts. For those, you would basically put the switch to either left or right. And Henry, if you'd like to elaborate a little on that.
Sorry, I didn't catch that last part. I had to step away from the computer for a real quick second.
Yeah. If you could elaborate real quick on why you have to just put fuel selector on left or right for a low wing aircraft.
Oh, yeah. So in a Cessna, since the wing is above the engine, and in all high wing airplanes, it's generally gravity fed, so all it has to do is, as long as the fuel port is covered by fuel, the fuel will flow freely down into the engine. But
Oh,
low wing air,
apologies. We forgot to mention earlier that the fuel is stored inside the wings, and that's why the high wing and low wings matter. So if you thought that the fuel was stored kind of behind where they sit, this wouldn't make sense to you. So just wanted to put that out there. I'm so sorry. Continue, Henry.
no worries, no worries. I'll add something about that later. But yeah, so in a low wing airplane, though, we only have the engine driven pump, which will suck the fuel out from the tanks because the wing is now below the engine. So the fuel is coming from below the engine. So, if you're when you take physics, you'll find out that we can't, that it can only flow down, liquids can really only flow down without any pressure being added. So, yeah, we have an engine driven pump, but we can only draw from fuel one tank at a time. Yeah, I think that's actually about it. Oh, and then for commercial airliners, just to go off something Raj said about wings being holding fuel, in commercial airliners, you can actually stand up in some of those fuel tanks because the wings, they don't seem very thick, but in actuality, they can hold quite a lot of fuel.
Tons and tons of just fuel. Yeah.
Just a
So
little fun fact here. If you're
go ahead.
short like me and the aircraft's parked on the ground, you can walk under a low wing aircraft without hitting your head on the wings. I am 5'5", I'm short. So if this aircraft is on the ground and you walk below the wings or across from the back to the front of the plane under the wings, I won't be able to hit my head on the wings other than the little strut that's going from the wing to the fuselage. But other than that, I won't be able to hit my head. If you're anything taller than 5'5", you will hit your head and you will have to be ducking down in order to get inside the aircraft.
I have smashed my head on the wings of Cessnas
I've
more
smashed my
times
head
than
on
I
the
can count.
strut. I've
Ooh.
smashed my head on the strut. I was looking down at the wheels. So when I was pre-flying, I was looking down at the wheels, and I looked up real quick, and I turned towards the front of the aircraft, and I started
Oh
walking.
no!
I just
Oh
banged my head
no!
right into the strut.
Oh jeez, that must have been
Yeah, the strut
painful.
is basically this little connector right here.
Yeah, a lot of GA pilots, what they like to do, because some older people, they can actually get some serious brain damage from being struck by the flaps because, you could be walking at full speed and then just hit a rigid structure designed to take a pretty high load. So, and in the trailing edge, the end portion of the flap can be pretty sharp. So what they do is they'll actually, being GA and how complex we are, they'll take a pool noodle, cut a slit down the middle of it, and just kind of stuff it onto the flap panel so that if you do hit it, at least you get a nice cushion.
Remove before flight, eh?
All right, so looks like we covered cruise, and we'll
Are we
move on
onwards to landing?
Yep.
Awesome.
I will show the landing
Okay.
slides.
So real quick, first we're gonna cover lazy landing procedure, which is you don't care about the rules. You just are in a plane and you just want to get it on the ground in a simulator, or if there's an emergency. God forbid. But yeah, so this is the lazy landing procedure. So the basics are you line up with the runway, set your flaps full and pull the power back, and then you follow the 2 white 2 red PAPI lights, which I will explain soon, and then you touch down on the runway. So Steven, do you want to line yourself up and then kind of go about this?
Yes, I am
I'll talk
currently
you
on
through it.
the downwind, so I have to turn base and final soon.
Awesome. Okay,
Give me
so
a
we
while.
can
I'll extend my
watch
downwind.
Steven.
I'll extend my
problem.
downwind so we can have a longer time to line up.
No problem.
Since my stream is running well, I'm gonna screen share on Discord my infinite flight so you can just see a non-delayed
So in real
version.
time? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
Hopefully
Appreciate
it
that.
works. Oops. Go live.
Oh, here you go.
Does it work?
Yep, it does work. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. So, are you streaming that on YouTube as well?
Oh no, I'm currently showing the slides. I will go back.
Yeah, so you should probably stream the simulator.
There we go. YouTube both sees the sim and the slides now.
Nice. Okay.
Although I
That's
don't
perfect.
know if it's showing red for encoding. Can you check the YouTube to make sure that everything's going well?
Yeah, I'll check it.
Also the audio quality too. Make sure it's not stuttering or
Okay.
anything.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. Okay, so where's the runway? Show us the runway,
Runway
Steven.
is right there. We're abeam the runway right now.
And
So that
that's
is
what airport is that?
that's San Martin.
San Martin. Okay, I thought so.
So I'm just gonna continue downwind, just maybe for another 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and then I'll turn back around. We'll line up for the
Sounds
runway.
good. So what Steven's flying right now is a traffic pattern, which is basically an imaginary pattern in the shape of a rectangle, with one of the long sides of the rectangle being right on top of the runway. So you can have a left pattern and a right pattern based on which side of the rectangle you want to place on the runway, but generally you're instructed on which pattern to follow. But we should discuss that in a future session.
Also, I just wanted to add something quick about the traffic pattern is that it is generally flown at a predetermined altitude, usually about 1,000 feet AGL, which just means 1,000 feet above ground level, so you would just take the airport elevation usually at 1,000 feet, and then you just fly the pattern at the highest point would be at that altitude. So at Reedy Hillview, it's about 1,100 feet, but it can vary depending on the location of the airport. So like here at the Lafayette Purdue University Airport, it's at 1,600 feet.
Yep, for
Right.
San
So
Martin, the airport elevation is
what's the
300,
altitude
so it's
there?
going to be 1,300 as our
1,300 feet.
pattern
Yeah.
altitude, which I just said
So
because I was at 25.
the altitude for the traffic pattern is not 1,000 feet above sea level, it's 1,000 feet above ground level. And that's why you have to take into account how high the airport is in the first place. And then you add 1,000 feet to that. So generally, there will be charts and stuff that tell you the altitude of an airport, and you'll know.
One last thing to discuss before I turn for the runway is that we are
Hmm.
showing infinite flight today. We are not showing X-Plane Mobile. As you can tell, it looks a little
Right.
different. X-Plane Mobile is a little more interactive, while infinite flight is just for basically, I guess more of a, it's more fun to fly around. Basically, I don't know.
Right.
They don't work on infinite flight. Does not work on scenery, or although they do work on terrain, but they don't work on scenery. When I mean scenery is like buildings and stuff like that. As you can see, it's a little looks weird, but at least you got mountains
It's a
and stuff.
little dry.
But they do work on their airplanes, and I'll just let you know the airplanes are on point. So maybe after this landing, I'll be able to show you guys the airplanes that Infinite Flight
Right.
has. All right, I'm gonna start turning
Okay, so
now.
based on our time allowance, I'm gonna see how many landings we can do.
We'll try to do two: the
Okay.
lazy landing and the perfect landing, maybe.
Sure, sounds good. Or actually, I can explain the perfect landing as you go about, but
Sure.
because the lazy landing is just a perfect landing
You can go ahead and start
with a
explaining the.
few steps taken out.
You can start
Right.
explaining the lazy landing right now.
Okay, so the lazy landing, as you can see Stephen lining up with the runway. As he lines up, he will set his flaps to full all the way down, and then as he does that, he will pull the power back, and then he will follow the PAPI lights. So the PAPI lights, PAPI PAPI, stands for Precision Approach Path Indicator Lights. So there's this thing called a glide slope, which is kind of an imaginary diagonal line that kind of stretches from the touchdown zone on the runway up into the air for several thousand feet. And then the airplanes that want to land on this runway are supposed to follow this imaginary diagonal line onto the runway. So the way pilots generally follow this without dialing an ILS or an instrument landing system, which we will go over later, is the PAPI light system, the Precision Approach Path Indicator lights. So as Steven lines up with the runway, there should be lights next to the runway, four lights, four dots. Um, each light can either be red or it can be white. And two of them should be red and two of them should be white. That means you're right on the glide slope where you're supposed to be. If too many of them are red, if 3 of them are red instead of 2, that means you're too low. And if just one of them is red and the other 3 are white, that means you're too high. So it might seem a little confusing at first, but as Steven approaches the runway and you get to look at the PAPI lights, you'll notice.
Well, the thing is, this airport doesn't have a PAPI. I think this thing has a VASI, or no? This thing has like a modified PAPI where it's only two lights instead of
Oh,
three,
right.
instead of four.
So some of them have 2 beams, but
Mhm.
you'll pretty much know that
As you can see, I am
half of
zoomed
them are
into it.
red and half of them are white.
Yeah, I am
exactly.
zoomed to it, so you can
kinda
see that 2 white dots right next to the left of the runway, to the left of the runway. So 2 white dots means I am too high. 1 red, 1 white means perfect. 2 red means too low. So
Too
that's
low,
how you work
exactly.
the two light PAPI in here.
Right.
I think there's a name for it. I just don't know.
So instead of remembering the numbers, I just kind of think of it as half of them. So half of whatever number of lights there may be, half of them are supposed to be white, and the other half are supposed to be red. And then yeah.
So there's actually just a little kind of scary fact. There's a kind of a morbid mnemonic to remember. It is that if you do red over white, you're all right. White over white, you'll fly all night because that implies you're too high. And then red over red, you're dead, which basically just means we're too low on the glide slope. We never really want to be too low on the glide slope. You always want to either be on or high for approach to the runway.
That's right. Oh, we have sound going.
Yep. I just didn't have the sound because we were talking
Nice.
a lot, but
No, this is a good idea. So you might see different lines and indications on the runway on our slides, but we will discuss those in a future session. So if you actually look at our slides, if you look at the lazy landing procedure slide on our Google Slides, you can actually see the PAPI lights next to the runway. They're kind of faint, but if you zoom in, there's 4 white lights, which means this pilot flying this approach is too high. But yeah, if you want to see what they look like in real life, you can see that on the lazy.
So I think in the sim you can
slide.
see that they turned 1 red, 1 white. It's kind of hard to tell.
Right.
But just keep on coming. Touchdown zone can be anywhere on the runway. Just don't touch down too late, or else you will overrun the runway. Just don't touch down too early either. Mainly just aim for the numbers, or just right after the numbers. You can see that there's numbers in there. They're 3-2.
So
3-2.
On some runways, there will be a black spot of rubber, right where the touchdown zone is. So oftentimes, if you see that, that's what I like to aim for when I'm flying around in my simulator. It's pretty helpful. It's also kind of like a diamond shape. So it's the widest where most airplanes have touched down, and that's generally where you want to touch down to. But it can get weird if the runway is wet, so watch out for that. And the lights turned red, and
there we go.
We're on the ground. Perfect. That was great. Yeah, so that's the lazy landing. You line up, you set your flaps full, you pull the power back, push it in if you need to, if you're too low. But yeah, pretty much follow the PAPI lights and just bring the plane down. Again, all of this needs experience. That's the only way you'll get it. Okay.
So
now we can
taxi
explain
back.
the full procedure.
Yeah, I'll taxi back and we'll do a perfect pattern.
Amazing.
So now, in order to get ready, you would, put your flaps back to 0. We'll do a 0 flap takeoff.
So you can just see the flaps go back in.
So when you do a 0 no flap takeoff, your rotate speed is 55. Rotate speed is basically the speed where you would start tilting your mobile device backwards to lift the plane off.
That's right.
If you
they don't have yokes.
If you want to take off with 1 notch of flaps, then if we do have time, we'll talk about 2 different takeoffs, which we normally practice as pilots in general aviation. So we'll talk about that for flaps. But if we don't get to that, if we do use flaps during a takeoff, just know that you would lift off a lot sooner than 55 knots. You might lift off anywhere between 40 to 50. But then be cautious, because if you pitch up too much and you dip below 40 knots, you will stall. So you have to pull up and be mindful of your speed and keep it above 40. Today I am flying the Civil Air Patrol livery. Although I did want to use the Embry Riddle, but I don't have that. You have to pay for a live subscription. Although we're not sponsored by Infinite Flight, by the way.
Well, I mean, as of now, we're not sponsored by anybody.
Sponsored by Gatorade.
Hey, if you're watching out there, sponsors, message me.
Taxi a little faster so we can line up and take right off. Would you like to go over the takeoff procedures, or just take off and?
Yeah, why not? It's a good idea to just simply repeat them. But yeah, you don't need to wait for me. Just go ahead. I'll just talk it over. So again, before takeoff, set the brakes, turn on your lights, trim 0, and do a control check. So in this area right here, Steven,
Would you like me to stop?
Yep. Do the
Parking brake set. All right, we're gonna go inside the cockpit. The lights are down here, but on the Infinite Flight, we're gonna make sure they're on. So lights, of course, see a panel here. Oh, they can't see it. Hold on, let me turn off the. There we go. You can see
trim
lights. Everything's on. Of course, the trim. Oh, my trim is set to -20 or +20 because it just feels correct here. But in real life, it would be 0.
Right, in real life, it would be 0. And then a control check real quick.
Yeah, we're gonna do control check. So in the cockpit, it will just look like this. You go right, left, back, forward, and you would basically make a box. And then on the outside, it would just can't really tell if you see it.
Right.
I'm just pushing my iPad around.
You would you would want to make sure that the control surfaces are actually moving.
Yep.
Okay, so final checks. Check your transponder.
We're not talking to ATC, we're VFR, so
right.
1200.
All set. Flaps.
We're doing no flap takeoff, so it's
no
up.
flap takeoff, all set. Lights are on, you just did that. Brakes. Brakes are off, and then line up with the runway.
Yep. And before we line up, we would just look down the runway. Is it cleared? No aircraft. So if we look on final, no aircraft on final.
You want to check the glide slope. Right. Basically, I mean, obviously, you wouldn't have the third-person view option in real life, but you know what we
Yeah.
do. Okay, so he's going to line up, and then he's going to gently push the throttle in as he lines up. Yep, use the rudder to line up. In goes the throttle, and then he will check his engine instruments.
Yep.
Make sure his RPM is climbing. Make sure the airspeed is climbing. Airspeed. Oh god.
Here comes 55. We pitch up.
Right, 55 knots. It is rotate.
And we shoot.
Positive rate. Gear up. Except not in a Cessna. That's what airline pilots would say in big planes. They would make sure the vertical speed was climbing, and they would say positive rate. Then once positive rate was established, they would say landing gear up, or gear up.
And in the Cessna, make sure you're climbing between 60 and 70 knots. You could go higher than 70, but you're not.
I thought it was 65 and 75.
64,
I mean,
62 for best.
You're the pilot.
62 for best angle of climb, and 74 for the best rate of climb. So 74 is basically the most altitude you get for a good amount of airspeed.
Got it.
But we're just climbing at 62 right now. Of course, 62 is going to be a greater amount of climb than 74. Although you're going slower, so you're taking up less distance. All right, we're going to turn crosswind now. Crosswind is basically it's a box.
The first turn you make.
The
first turn you make when you take off from the runway on the box. It can either be a left turn or a right turn, depending on what pattern is being used. And then because we have selected the right turn pattern, all of these are going to be right turns.
Yep. And
So that was crosswind.
airports do have regulations if you have to do left or right. Most likely the right runway will have a right pattern, so you're turning right turns. Left runway would have left turns. Although there are some runways that restrict you from doing one or the other. So there's something called a AFD, Airport Flight Directory, something like that. AFD. We read up on that. There's an AFD page for every single airport, and lots of information. It'll tell us what to do.
Okay, so which leg is this, Steven?
This is now the downwind leg.
Downwind, that's right.
As you
Okay.
can see, it is called upwind and downwind because when we're going downwind, we're going with the wind because pilots are supposed to land and take off into the wind. So right
Against
now,
the wind.
against the wind. So right now we're going downwind because we're going with the wind. When we were taking off on the other side, we were on the upwind because we were facing the wind.
And then when we were turning, that was crosswind because the wind was across. It was at a 90-degree angle. Well, supposedly.
Alright, so we're abeam the numbers 3-2 now. So what we would do is start to reduce power to 1500 RPM. So you would see that your needle on the RPM goes to 15. Have to see.
Right. So as we what's the leg before final called?
A base.
Base leg.
So before
Okay.
we turn base, we
That's
put our
good.
power to 1500,
Mm-hmm.
and we also put flaps 10, which I just did.
Right. So as he turns, we're gonna start following the proper landing procedures. So you want to follow the before landing checklist. You want to make sure your seatbelts are good.
So
Yeah,
during this downwind, we have flaps 10.
Right.
And we're trying to aim for 85 knots, which I'm at right now.
So as you cross it, you want to follow the checklist. Seatbelts are good. Your mixture is rich. Your carb heat or
I did not have
carburetor.
mixture rich.
Oh no. Yeah, you want to make,
There you
make sure
go.
that mixture is rich. Okay. And then carb heat is on. And then landing light is on.
Some aircrafts don't have carb heat. This one is fuel injected,
Mm-hmm.
fuel pump, so we don't
So
have carb
right, doesn't
stuff
make
on
a
this.
difference here. So
So now
now
we're
as
turning
you
base.
turn base, and then as you turn on to final, you want to make sure that you keep your altitude indicator on the horizon. So make sure your plane is level with the horizon.
It doesn't have to be
And
level.
then-
You keep descending.
Well, a little, yeah, right, a
And you
little
put
up,
flaps
but
20, just like that.
yeah, full flaps, and then
Flaps 20, and then full flaps when during final. Now you aim for about 75
right.
knots.
I'm sorry, I was distracted with the thing I was looking at.
Now we aim for 75 knots. Hopefully we overshot the runway when we turn final now.
So as you line up for the runway until the very end, you want to keep your pitch angle about consistent, and you want to control your altitude with the amount of power you put in on the engine, and you want to control the speed with your pitch. But you want to keep your speed relatively consistent so you can hold the pitch. But
Yeah, as you
when
can
on
see,
final, that's how you control
I'm a little
it.
too
instead of
high and I'm a
pushing
little
it
too
down.
fast, so power comes out to 0% and we're just pitching down.
Right.
Flaps are now full. You can use
So
trim during each leg of the flight to adjust.
Flaps help increase lift and also increase drag, which allows airplanes to fly slower, but still have enough lift to stay up in the air. So that's why flaps are important for landing. They generate more lift. So as he lines up, he will follow the happy lights. And then right before he touches down, he will do what's called a flare. So a flare is where you gently pull the nose up a few degrees. So your back wheels, your main landing gear
About to stall.
touches the runway first gently, and then your nose wheel touches down. And right before you flare, you want to cut power so that you don't float along the runway in midair.
You know, in general aviation, we don't really call it a flare. We call it transition. So right here, I go power idle, so less power, and we start, pitching
Right.
upwards. There we go, touchdown.
There you go.
Because a flare is
Perfect. So,
basically where you keep power in, you just pitch up to basically hold
oh,
an
okay.
angle. So
Yeah,
just
I
a little
guess I was wrong
transition.
about that. Thank you.
Um,
Transition.
as you
Word.
can see, you did see a little stall alarm come up on the screen because our airspeed was below 40, and anything below 40 will stall. You're basically stalling your plane when you're landing a Cessna. You could land
Yeah,
around
so
45, 50, but you will bounce and you might start, generating lift again and shoot right up from the runway. But other than that, you basically stall and let the airplane plop onto the ground
so
smoothly.
when I talk about pulling the power back, if you ever watch or if you ever listen to the readouts on an Airbus airplane, it actually tells you how high you are and when you get really close in terms of hundreds of feet. So it goes 100 feet, then the next call out is at 50 feet, and then it goes by tens of feet, all the way down to 10. So at about 20 or 10 feet, based on what model of Airbus you're flying, these big airliners they'll they'll shout retard at the pilot as a warning, and that is to retard the thrust levers and pull them back so that the engine power is cut and there's no more thrust coming from the engine. But that's done right above the runway when the wheels are just about to touch down, so that they can gently touch down without taking up too much runway and having the thrust reversers ready. But yeah, that's pretty much how you do a perfect landing.
I want to stop streaming
Steven
on
has been
Discord.
Steven has been doing an excellent job with the landings today.
All right. So of
And
course on the screen, I am
we're just on time too.
showing the landing procedures. I should have shown that a little earlier, but I just wanted to show a full screen of the sim. But that's basically what it is. Our landing procedures. You can follow along. Um,
Right. So
Next
yeah,
slide.
that's
Questions.
that
Okay.
that quote is pretty accurate on the landing procedures. Any landing you can walk away from is a good landing, and any landing that the plane can fly away from again is a great landing.
Yep. All right. We'll start to conclude our stream today. Any other officers want to add anything?
I think we're good. Yeah, we had great time management today, so I'm proud of us for that.
All right.
Yeah, we're about 40 seconds away from having our stream go exactly 1 hour. So thank you for joining. We appreciate your support, and we hope to see you in future sessions. I'm Yuvraj. Today flying was Steven. We had some help from Calvin, our secretary, or apologies, our treasurer. And we always appreciate Henry being here and joining us.
Of course. Henry joins
So
us from across the United States. He's of course
he's at
located in Indiana, but
he's at Purdue University
yep,
studying to become an airline pilot.
we're thankful that he's able to join us every day, every stream.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a absolute pleasure to be here. And if any of our followers listening today has any questions about collegiate aviation programs or just how to try and pursue being a commercial pilot, feel free to write to flyprojectaviate.com and they can go ahead and just let me know, and I'll be more than happy to help you out.
Yep.